Okay, hello and welcome to the next session in our Dynamics Cloud Essentials webcast series. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and this session looks at security considerations in the cloud and answers the question of what really changes. Joining us for today's event are two ERP and cloud veterans, and they're also returning speakers for us. They are Concerto Cloud Services Technology Architect Rob Curls and Vice President Greg Pierce. And we're really glad to have both of them back. So as we get started today, I just want to add that we do invite you to add your feedback and ask questions during Greg and Rob's presentation. You can use the Q&A block or the chat that you'll see on the right side of the webcast session. And please look for a survey when you depart the session later. There will be a $100 Visa gift card given out to one of the people who fills that out. So without further delay, please allow me to welcome our first presenter, Greg Pierce.
Hey, Jason. How are you? Thank you.
Yeah.
So I am Vice President of Concerto Cloud Services, and I have with me here today Rob Curls. Rob is an architect in cloud solutions. He spent time with Microsoft as well, has a very extensive infrastructure and cloud infrastructure background. Thanks for being with us, Rob. So I wanted to start off telling a little bit about our cloud solution, and really when you think about it, the Concerto cloud solution is one that is built as your cloud. So if you break it down, I think that cloud solutions these days fall in a couple of different categories, and there's the we can do it a lot cheaper, and then there's we can do it less expensive but better, and that's the category that Concerto falls in. And a few facts about our cloud solution. We believe that there really are different areas that are important for a cloud solution to make sense and for the cloud solution to really thrive for a company. And those tie to the technology, of course, that's in place, and for us, that's a best of breed, really gold plate type solution. It's the people and processes. So for us, that would tie to ITIL process and would have formalized change management and all the things you would see in an enterprise IT solution. It ties to the systems we have in place to be able to take care of our customers, and then the reliability that really ties to not only same site resiliency, but out of the box mission criticality with multiple site disaster recovery. And I think really putting a wrapper around the whole thing is our security and compliance footprint, which really allows us to provide customers solutions that are tailored to their specific industry vertical and to offer expertise and not only compliance, but governance and risk mitigation for a wide array of problems that can arise. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what the drivers are for cloud today and why people are moving towards cloud. And, I think it's a very interesting stat. Recently I saw an IDC vice president speaking, and they were talking about cloud adoption. And one of the things that they had in their slide deck was that by 2016, 70% of CIOs will have a cloud-first mentality and strategy. Doesn't mean they put everything in cloud, but it means that that is going to be their first inclination. Will this fit in cloud? Can I make it work? Can I make it integrate? Now, one of the things that has been less prevalent in moving to cloud has been ERP, and I think that's because of a few different things. At first, it was limitations around technology and integration and the ability to be interoperable, and I think those hurdles have been overcome. And then there are things that tie to security, and I think we've moved beyond the phase where security is a hurdle and a barrier, and actually security in the cloud is better and a more advantageous way to go, because you can get so many things out of the box from your cloud provider that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get on-premise. And the reason is because the cloud provider can spend money and spread it across multiple customers. So when you're looking at a intrusion detection or intrusion prevention or a security posture, it's spread across thousands of customers as opposed to one or two or three, say, sites for a company. And I think one of the other things is just that the loss of control. And ERP is the most mission-critical application. And we think that people are starting to see the movement of acceleration to cloud for ERP. We also think that you're definitely going to see more of a virtual private cloud footprint for ERP as we move forward for the reasons I just mentioned, as opposed to a public cloud type solution for ERP to maintain that control and the security, to have that high level of interoperability, to be able to integrate with other systems. Those are the things we think are going to drive it. So it's a skill set and an interoperability conversation more than it is, hey, how can we get it absolutely as cheap as possible, though you do want to drive costs down as well. So a few times, as you're sitting there right now, you may be thinking, is it time to move to cloud, or maybe you already have a cloud strategy in place. But sometimes when we see customers move to cloud, or when they have some kind of upgrade coming up, when there's some kind of change within their business, either it got a lot bigger or it got a lot smaller, or there's outside forces that are starting to push it. For example, we have a retail company that we work with who recently decided that they were going to start selling e-commerce. And e-commerce, just by its very definition, has to be cloud. And it really pushed the entire back end of their environment into a cloud environment. And I think that you see a lot more of that, not only with retail, but manufacturers who are working with other organizations, and the list goes on and on and on, professional services groups. So those outside events, I think, are pushing cloud. You also see it when there's upgrade cycles, when there's times that come where internal IT may be a little bit in upheaval, maybe some people left, and there's some things going on from a stability standpoint. And also when you're looking at IT budgets that are either flatlined or shrinking, cloud is a way to be able to provide services and solutions around applications and around specific environments without having to raise the budget up. I think the interesting thing is that when you talk to people about cloud and you try to determine why is it that you're looking at cloud and what is exciting about cloud to you, the first thing that somebody normally says is cost. But when you really dig into it, a cloud is more than that. It is the ability to add really a better level of service for people, employees, at the firm. It's a way to provide a better level of service to the customers and to help customers scale, or to help companies scale as they move forward. So if you think about it, cloud is going to mitigate risk for a company because you can have multiple layers of disaster recovery. It allows ubiquity in access, so it doesn't really matter which device you have, you can access a cloud-based solution. It limits the amount of overhead that goes into fixing problems that may arise from application dependence on a PC. So, it used to be an IT professional would have to spend a lot of time configuring and making sure that applications installed on individual PCs were running, that all the right files were on there and all the things were working right and compatible. And now when it's a cloud-based application deployment, all that stuff goes away. And you don't have to worry about those things. And what you can worry about is trying to make sure you scale properly to support your business. And it also gives really that level of access that's required in a 24/7 world. Let's face it, everybody has different business hours. I think standard are 8:30 to 5. Reality is that it's become a scenario where if somebody sends you an email at 7, depending on who it is, they expect an answer by 7:30. And you need to have systems that match that expectation. And it's very difficult for an IT shop to build a truly 4.9 environment, because it requires geographic redundancy and it requires failover windows that are inside of 15 minutes, and that's why cloud has become so prevalent. I think it ties into the other expectations that are driving companies in this world. You think about it, there's a lot of different things that tie into what IT has to do, right? And though the universe of IT is expanding, their budgets aren't. So they have to accomplish more with less. And you have business-to-business applications. You have, in a lot of cases, companies that were business-to-business that were selling, say, a manufacturer to a distributor, and now there's an e-commerce solution, so you're selling direct to customers and consumers online. It's changing people's business models. And that change of business model is not easy. And there can be a lot of different things that tie to it. That means that IT has to provide the systems that are going to be able to provide the right level of support for those organizations. And it's just a tough thing to do without external expertise, which is why a lot of companies have moved to cloud. And if you think about it, as you move forward, there's this phrase, the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is all about the different endpoints in the world that are going to be cloud-enabled. And those cloud-enabled things will be right down to a lamp in your living room that can be turned on and off, and cars that check in, and cars that will let people know automatically that you're late for a meeting because of where you are from a GPS standpoint. All those things are going to make the world make it easier for you from a calendaring perspective. It's going to make the world much more complex. And again, I think it's just going to cause more and more of a cloud acceleration. So as companies look at moving their ERP systems to cloud, I think that the advent of cloud happened right around 2008, when all of a sudden there was a clamp down on budgets. Companies were looking for different ways to do things, more creative ways to do things, ways that didn't include upfront capital, and a lot of that has really driven more of an efficiency within how we all do business. Let's face it, though the economy is better, it's not like everybody's gone crazy on spending and returned it to levels that were pre-2008. In fact, in most cases, it's the same or it's less than it was then. So if you think about it from the standpoint of efficiencies that need to be in place and how to drive the efficiencies, it really ends up driving a lot more conversations around cloud. I think one interesting thing that we've seen certainly pop up recently is this whole idea of shadow IT. And I don't know how many of you on the phone have heard of that phrase before, but really what it shows is an interesting phenomenon where different business units, and I think marketing groups is one of the leads in this case, are just going out and they're consuming cloud-based resources like CRM systems or lead generation systems, and they're bypassing IT completely. They're just going out and doing it. And it's not because they're maliciously trying to avoid IT. They just don't see it as an IT spend. It's not something that really touches internal systems. It's not something that causes configuration to have to be done. They access it through a browser or some other mechanism, and that's it. So you see a lot more of companies using the resources that would have traditionally been within the IT fold, but going direct to cloud solution providers for it. If you look at the stats, it's interesting to see what the percentage is of people who have some kind of shadow IT spend, and right now it's somewhere around 44%. Have something tied to shadow IT. And I think you see this in a little bit larger organizations. There was a stat that I saw recently, and it asked IT departments, how many of you allow unmanaged devices or browser-enabled software that is not sanctioned by IT within your organizations? and 20% of them said we do, 80% said we don't allow it. And then there was a poll done by, same group did poll for the end users and said, hey, how many of you bring unmanaged devices into work and use them? How many of you consume applications that are non-IT sanctioned? And 87% said that they do. So there's definitely a disconnect between what organizations, what people within organizations are doing and what IT sees as their role, and I think you're going to see that continue to evolve. You know, one of the other things I think that you're seeing right now is a consolidation in the marketplace, and it's a marketplace with what's called a long tail. In other words, there's a lot of different companies that are jumping into this arena. I think that from a public cloud perspective, you see a couple of leaders, and that's really Amazon and Microsoft Azure. From a virtual private cloud perspective, I think you see a few leaders. You've got really tying into virtual private cloud with management. You've got Data Dimension, you've got Terramark, you've got Concerto, and then maybe a handful of others that are challenging. So one of the other things that you get to see in this sort of very hyper-competitive market is a drive towards the bottom, and it means that from a cloud standpoint, prices have not remained the same. They've actually been driven down, especially for commodity pieces connected to, say, storage and just flat file disaster recovery footprints that you'd have to spin up. Amazon and Azure are in what seems like a mortal battle to see who can get to the lowest penny denominator at the current time, which can be, for the consumer, not such a bad thing. So when you look across cloud and trying to determine where you want to move, you know, I think that you know, there's a saying that's been around forever, which is there's no bad press, and I don't think I agree with that. I think that there has been plenty of bad press recently for companies, and it's a sort of press, I think, especially for companies that rely extraordinarily heavily on e-commerce, the type of press that can put companies out of business. I'm not saying Target's going to go out of business, and it certainly can cost people their jobs. And it is tied to security. And that security footprint, I think, has become more and more important. We have transferred, or we have transitioned from a world where it was hackers who wanted to show that they can do something and wanted to make a name for themselves, and amateurs, to a professional business. And professional organized crime really would be a more appropriate way to say it. It means that they are savvy and they are very good. And you know, there's three different things that are important from a security standpoint, and that is to make sure that you understand what your risks are. It is to make sure that you have the right things in place to protect the best you can based on what your solutions are and based on the sensitivity of the data that you have within your system. And then the third is that you understand that there is no bulletproof system. In other words, there's no unhackable system that's ever been created. And therefore, one of the things that's extraordinarily important is to make sure that you have a mitigation strategy. In other words, this is what we're going to do if/when we have a breach. And those things are as technical as shut down XYZ ports and so forth and all that stuff, down to this is our communication plan out to our customers. And these are the people we would communicate to, and this is when we would start communicating to them. If you put that in place and you have it end-to-end, you're really not going to end up in a situation where you're surprised. It never feels good to be in a breach situation, but to have a plan on how to take care of it that you can follow is an extraordinarily better place to be than to just expect that it's never going to happen.
That's a great point, Greg. Customers really appreciate, the faster you can go to market with the notification and let them know that, hey, things are going wrong, the better off everybody is in a situation like that.
So if you look at things, this is a poll that was done on cloud security and security within clouds. And I think that, it's one of those things where, is your information more secure in a cloud than it is on-premise? Well, it's kind of like, is your money safer in a bank, or is it safer in a sock underneath your mattress? I think that, banks have a lot more safeguard now. In 2008, it probably was safer under your mattress. And I think that if you look at cloud providers today, it's much the same. There are some really good banks, and there were some really bad banks, and people figured out which ones. Well, there's some really good cloud providers, and there's some really bad ones. You don't want to be with one of the really bad ones. One of the things that I think that you want to look for in a cloud provider is the right level of process and procedure to make sure that you understand that they have the right change management in place so things aren't going to slip through the cracks. The other thing you want to make sure they have is intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, or IDS and IPS. That should be standard right out of the gate. They should also be able to certify to you that they have had penetration testing done, that they've had remediation done afterwards. And then also, I think from a compliance standpoint, it's interesting. There's different ways that people can answer a question. And if you ask if somebody were, say, SOC compliance, which is standard operating controls, and there's SOC 1, there's SOC 2, and there's SOC 3. For us, we have all three of them. And if you ask some organizations, are you compliant? So we would say, yes, we're compliant. Some will say, we meet that standard. That means they're not compliant, but they feel like they have the right standards and controls to meet it. It's a big difference. So you have to be careful of how people verbalize their compliance and their security posture. SOC 3 compliance, just so you have an idea, takes a minimum of 12 months of continuous audit to determine that you have the right technology in place, the right level of control, the right processes and procedures, and you follow them over a period of time. So it's no small deal. And I should clarify that SOC 1, 2, 3 are, from a formality standpoint, known as attestations, not compliance. So, really, I think it's important for you, when you're looking at cloud providers, to dig in and determine the level of security and just how secure it is. And listen, just because it's a big name doesn't mean that they're more secure. I think that there are plenty of kind of the public cloud postures that are created based on the fact that they give you this pool of compute resources that could be secure and could be compliant if you configure it properly, but a lot of the onus is on you. And if you look at solutions that are virtual private cloud, or like some of the virtual private cloud solutions that we have in place, we bring those security, governance, and risk postures to you right out of the box. So not only the technology pieces, but the processes and the procedures that'll get you there. And if you go down the road because you don't understand some of the compliance, which sometimes happens, and ask us to do something that would put you outside of compliance, we're going to let you know. And we would actually ask for a compliance exception to be signed, in that case, by a customer. Generally, that'll drive a conversation, and a lot of times, I'd say 90% of the time, the customer will decide not to make that change, once we start going down that road. So, if you think about it, we started off talking about the things that are driving the adoption of cloud, and the things that are really pushing us towards this world where cloud is going to be top of mind. 70% are going to have cloud as the leader from their strategy perspective. And as you move forward, I think it's important to understand that security is not something that you can ever compromise on. I think security has to be in place, and it has to be the right security. And what you need to make sure of is that you don't sacrifice any security for a little bit of extra cost benefit. I think as you look at kind of the marketplace and the landscape, what we've seen is a lot more of an adoption from a private cloud perspective. And private cloud providers are able to give that extra security layer that give people peace of mind. I think there was a recent survey that showed that people were willing to pay a premium of somewhere in the neighborhood of 24–25% to be able to have all those security postures already in place and ready to go, which I think is a fundamental shift and difference. And look, I think that companies, as they are starting to adopt cloud, are trying to figure out what are the things that are important to me from a cloud perspective, and how am I going to move forward in this world to the best of my company's needs. So Rob, maybe for a second you want to talk about the hybrid model and how public and private tie together.
Absolutely. So we see public cloud offerings like Office 365, CRM Online that are out there, and then you have the opposite end of the spectrum. I should say that in the public model, you have many, many customers that are sharing compute resources, that are sharing really configured systems with their data sitting side by side. There are access controls in place that prevent you from accessing maybe directories of their organization. But ultimately, I think IBM has the commercial out right now with the little mouse that runs through the house. Though what one customer does could affect what another customer could do, or may hinder the performance of your cloud environment. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have the private cloud deployment, where there are no crosstalk communications between different customer environments. One customer's reports, long-running reports, isn't going to hinder your day-to-day operations. Typically, where we see private cloud is, again, mission-critical environments that require the utmost of performance, utmost of security. And then somewhere in between, you have this hybrid model, where we leverage maybe virtual machines from AWS or virtual machines from Azure for some aspects of it, lower-end web front ends, things like that. We may need to scale up or scale down very quickly. We'll leverage public cloud solutions for maybe mail or more commodity-based systems. And we'll have connectivity into the private cloud from those environments for those more mission-critical applications.
Yeah, so think about some of the differences of on-premise versus cloud and how you get there. I think it's a market difference. You know, when you think about it from a risk standpoint or disaster recovery, you're going to get in a cloud environment generally N+1 in the data center. So that means there's nothing that doesn't have a redundant pair. So whatever it is, it has a +1 connected to it. Then you're going to get geographic redundancy for failover. So it creates an environment where you have a much higher level of uptime. You also have application expertise that I think is very difficult to be able to pull together outside of that. And I think being able to have that application expertise also helps to lower risk. It also removes barriers connected to CapEx and what it looks like to have to invest capital up front. I mean, let's face it, there's better ways to invest your capital than in IT assets, like buying servers and stuff like that, and that is to increase your sales force, increase marketing, to be able to get to a point where you have more resources that will drive more revenue for your organization. When you think about public cloud and private cloud, you know, I think that there are definitely economies of scale within the public cloud arena. And I think about these in terms of almost like airplanes. And, you know, if you think about it in a multi-tenant environment where you want to have density, in other words, a lot of customers and a lot of users, it becomes almost like an airplane game. It costs me X for the airplane, Y for the gasoline or fuel, and Z for the people that are going to service and run the plane. And I want to get as many people as I can on the airplane, which is fine if you end up in a decent seat, but nobody ever wants to have that middle seat, or I don't know very I know very few people who enjoy the middle seat. And you kind of don't get the choice. Sometimes you end up, with what's called a noisy neighbor, and those are terms that you can use for public cloud as well. And I guess you could use it on an airplane. I've had a few noisy neighbors. From a private cloud perspective, it's more of a scenario where it's an upgraded experience, and it's more legroom. You don't get the middle seat, and it's an environment that, yes, costs a little bit more money, but I think gives a better experience. So, when we think about cloud, we think it is decidedly a hybrid world, and that as we move forward, you're going to see more and more of the hybrid model in place. So think about it from the standpoint of data that you may have in your own enterprise right now and what you might want to do with it. It really ends up becoming an interesting situation. I mean, you have scenarios where you may want to specifically dive into ERP, and it's very mission critical, can't ever be down, needs to be secure, needs to be something that can't be accessed by anybody ever. That's probably a really good private cloud type application. And then you look at other things that you may have, maybe some flat files you want to store, maybe you have a portal that you want to push out for employees to look at news. Maybe you even have a disaster recovery footprint where you want to have some stuff stored just off-site. Those are really good public cloud, and I think email is another one that ends up being a pretty good public cloud, depending on the situation solution as well. When we look at deploying solutions, we have the connectors and the integrations already in place for public cloud, and we can take a solution and move things to the right spot. So we'll put the stuff that's mission critical, that can't ever be down, in the private cloud piece, and put the other pieces within the public cloud arena in an already pre-configured, highly connected environment.
I think we talked about that.
Yes, I did. Now we're going to dive a little bit into some best practices to secure your organization. And I think it's important to understand that security is not a one-time thing that you put in place and then forget it. It's an ongoing program that is important to continue to update, continue to stay within the guidelines from a process and procedure standpoint. I think it's very important to understand what your goals are. Look, a goal is not just to be as secure as possible because it's too ambiguous. I think it's important to have an idea of what your critical systems are, what your confidential information is, how you're going to protect them, and like I said earlier, what your mitigation strategy is in case of any kind of breach. And there are different parts that tie to it. There's your physical layer, so in other words, access to your office and how you get into the office through, say, swipe badges and so forth, and how you get into your data center. There's the technical pieces that tie to it from an IT footprint standpoint, and there's the governance pieces. In other words, these are the things that we do on a regular basis to make sure that we don't end up in a scenario where we have a breach. So Rob, maybe you want to talk through some of the information security domains.
Absolutely. So it really plays into the defense and depth strategy you have deployed for your organization, controlling access to the data itself, the application security, so going back and ensuring that the apps are secured and in accordance with best practices within the industry as well as from the manufacturer. Greg touched on a little bit of the physical security itself, and great examples within the data center. So we limit access into the facility. Our data centers have perimeters around the campus themselves with guards. There's biometric scanning that takes place to get into the building in multiple locations, man traps with authentication mechanisms with security guards along the way in. Going back to what Greg mentioned too, a little bit about the governance side. You have the soft side with your people, making sure that they understand the legal and regulations and compliance postures that you have to have when handling data for certain types of customers.
So security awareness, I think, is making sure that all of us are good corporate citizens and don't end up in a scenario where we're like an ostrich that has their head buried in the sand and just kind of cross our fingers and hope that there's no breach or hope that there's no security problems that we run into. It's the understanding that there's a potential that somebody's going to break into the system and that there's safeguards that need to be in place and knowing what the lines of defenses are that you have in place to make sure that they're aligned. And look, if you're a larger organization, you have a chief security officer or somebody who runs GRC that makes sure those things are in place. In a smaller organization, you still need to have these things in place, especially if you're going to be storing credit card information or going to be able to possibly put somebody's personal information at risk. So without trying to completely beat this horse, it does include information about how to protect, how to make sure you can mitigate threats by detecting them, what you do to react to them. And it's also a continuing education process. Look, this is not only technology and process and procedures, it's also about people. If somebody calls one of the people within your organization and asks them what their password is and pretends they're from the help desk, those are things that at least have to be taught at a base level.
If you look at the industry, I think it was $120 million this year was scammed from users because they believed that Microsoft was calling them from their technical support line, and they got them to enter their credit card information or pay them to do whatever it is that they do. And it can happen to anybody. I've been in this space for a long period of time, and my own father fell for the scam, and I told him that, Microsoft will never call you. They don't care what you're doing with your computer. Don't believe somebody that calls you and says that they're calling from Microsoft to help you with something, especially if you never initiated the call.
So as you look at compliance and start moving into, beyond just best practice security and the compliance pieces, and you start asking your cloud provider for certifications, there's a myriad of different certifications that are in place. If you look at it from the standpoint of ones that you need for your organization, you probably already know ones that you're required to have. Others I think that are important are SOC compliance. It shows that a company to a certain level is buttoned up and they have been audited over a period of time and they follow the processes and procedures, they walk the walk. If you are looking at a public company, and where this comes in, even if you're not public, is every now and again a company will decide that they are going to go down the public route. Then you have Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. Within healthcare, you have HIPAA, and if you're working with companies that are within the healthcare arena, you may be subject to HIPAA compliance as well. There's compliance that ties to personal card information, in other words, credit cards. That's the one that's been in the news most recently. There's different layers and levels of PCI compliance that you would look at. If you're doing anything for the defense industry that ties to, say manufacturing, you may be subject to ITAR compliance, which is an anti-terrorism measure. There's FIPS level security that you need to have in place if you're dealing with government groups. Safe harbor ties to the EU. And, in a lot of these, if you were to say, for example, that you were safe harbor compliant and you're not, there are very stiff penalties. And it can be audited by the FBI, so they're no laughing matter for certain. So I think, one of the things that gets overlooked in cloud is because people start thinking about disaster recovery and disaster prevention as a not a nice to have anymore, but like table stakes, like every single cloud provider has them. I think it's a dangerous assumption because there's different levels of disaster recovery in place. Matter of fact, we'll compete with cloud providers very, very often where the customer understanding is that they have multiple sites that they're failing over to out of the box, and where in fact they may have multiple sites. They don't price their standard configurations with multiple site failover, which means that if something happens to their primary data center, you're going to be down for days before you come back up. So it's important questions to ask. And some of the phrases that tie to that are geodiversity or geographic diversity. There's RTO and RPO, and your recovery time and recovery point objective. There's things that you can do from a data backup perspective that I think are important. One of them is encryption. So generally with a security posture, you're going to have security on data in transit, so stuff moving. If it's a backup, you may want to look at adding encryption for data at rest as well, depending upon what your security requirements are and compliance, and if there's information, be it HIPAA or PCI, that may be in place. If you look at us, the Concerto model, we have a U.S. footprint, and then we also have a Western European footprint with dedicated environments for customers in a virtual private cloud scenario. We like to make sure that there's formalization around processes and procedures to make sure that security is followed and that the right processes are in place to mitigate anything that might arise, and have a fairly sophisticated layered approach to security that only ties to anti-malware and OS patching, but all the way through the 7 layers of the OSI stack to make sure that we have the right level of security to be able to meet the compliance we need, and also the best level of security to be able to meet just the general best security practices. So a few ways that cloud providers can address concerns really is to give you transparency, first and foremost, and to be able to allow you to know how they're protecting the different pieces that are within their cloud environment and what you can do in case of some kind of breach and how you would address it as well. I think that there's a bunch of cloud providers that get, I think, a little bit of a slap from industry experts because they don't give that level of transparency. And I think it's extraordinarily important, if you're going to put your data there, that you understand exactly what the risks are and exactly what they're doing to be able to protect you.
I think something that our customers really appreciate too, Greg, is when we walk them through the process to show them all of the functions that we said that we were going to do. The data center failover, we require testing before going live of that geographical failover to the alternate data centers. And we do that annually as well, along with verification of the encryption, both at the table level and the backup level, data in transit, et cetera.
So I think really what's important to remember is that security is an ongoing process, that there are different types of clouds and there's different types of clouds for different applications, that compliance is important, but that compliance is not the end-all be-all, that you need to make sure that you have best practices around security, and that can include IDS and IPS, and that it's not all about data in transit. There's also security that needs to be in place for data at rest as well. I think with that, we're going to open it up to questions, see if anybody had anything that came up during the presentation that they wanted clarity on, or just more information.
All right, great. And folks, you can enter your questions through the Q&A block that you should see to the right of the slides right now. We also had a sort of a poll question that we could bring up if you wanted to, just as one more thing for people to kind of think about as we wrap up here today. Do you guys want to run that, or should we save it for the next event?
Go ahead. I didn't know we had one.
Okay. Well, it's really which aspects of cloud security you're most concerned with. I think it would be interesting to hear a little input on that. One question that did come in, do you have any best practices or recommendations for handling security when you're in a hybrid environment?
I think classifying your data is a great step in the right direction in terms of high, medium, and low business impact. If you can, as I know most organizations would attempt to keep HBI data either in the private cloud or on-premise, whereas they would allow the medium to low business impact data out into that hybrid model, into the hybrid areas. It becomes more difficult when you start talking about data that's transmitted via email because it could exist in any environment that way. So you could have HBI data that you try and keep private, however your email system exists in a public cloud, and then you're transmitting that HBI data via that mechanism and it's being stored out there. And if that's the case, then leveraging solutions like rights management services to encrypt those emails or sign those messages and encrypt those messages helps you to definitely protect that data.
All right, great. So I'm having a little trouble showing the poll results, but I can tell you that in terms of the aspects of cloud security that people are concerned with, it's split evenly between data privacy and security and audit and compliance. So those are, I don't know if those are the areas where you would expect to see those answers, but that's pretty much the split that we got from attendees.
Absolutely. I always hear data privacy and security. It's the number one, typically.
Mm-hmm. All right. Why don't we make the last call for questions here, and we can also start wrapping up. So in terms of your contact information, Rob and Greg, I see there's info at concertocloud.com, which people can use, and we will be reaching out again once we have a recording available.
Right.
So with that, I think we will start to wrap things up here. Greg and Rob, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks for having us, Jason.
All right, thanks to everyone in the audience. This concludes the session.
Thank you.